Hello and welcome to the third panel of the Wolf Humanities Forum Undergraduate Symposium Conference, either or. My name is Kevin Platt. I teach in Russian and East European Studies and Comparative Literature, and I'm so happy to be here. This panel is titled Revolutionary Dimensions. It could have been subtitled, I think, Russian Modernism to Avant-Garde, because there's a remarkable coherence in the presentations that we have here. The first presentation is going to be by Liam Phillips, who's a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences pursuing a degree in comparative literature and Russian and East European studies, and who it was recently learned will be continuing on to a PhD program at Columbia this fall in Slavic languages and literatures. Liam's interested in 19th century and early 20th century Russian literature, theory, and culture. He investigates the relationships between reader, author, and text, and how these relationships inform class, power, and the social world. Liam's also interested in literary sentimentalism and romanticism, innovative literary form, and cultural semiotics. His project aligns with his honors thesis in Russian East European Studies and an advised research position with the Russian East European Studies Department, overseen by Dr. Brian Kim, who's sitting here in the front. Please welcome Liam to the podium. He's going to be presenting on form and figure in the Russian avant-garde from Mikhail Kuzmin's Stroinost to Filmic Montage.
Hello. Perfect. Okay, again, I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Liam. And here is a smaller snippet of a larger project titled Form and Figure in the Russian Avant-Garde, Mikhail Kuzmin, Stroinost to Filmic Montage. Okay. In Mikhail Kuzmin's essay on Beautiful Clarity, O Прекрасной Ясности in 1909, Kuzmin distinguishes between two kinds of artists: those who bring chaos and division, in the Russian Rashiplonist, to art, and those who bring harmoniousness and fullness, Stroinost. The word Stroinost appears in Kuzmin's novel Wings, Krылья, in 1906, to describe the orderliness of a figure, quote, which was striking even beneath a jacket that captivated you and made you feel embarrassed. In Kuzmin's prose and theory, Kuzmin uses Stroinost to refer to, one, the orderliness of literary form that brings one closer to beautiful clarity, and two, the orderliness of a body, a figure, that is the homoerotic object of desire for Kuzmin's narrator or protagonist. Through an examination of the use of Stroinost across Kuzmin's prose, the term will be articulated as Kuzmin's attempt at an advancement of aesthetic theory and creation through textual montage in prose. How does Kuzmin articulate Stroinost and its role in aesthetic creation? In On Beautiful Clarity, Kuzmin orders artists to create with a sense of orderliness and proportion as if they were an architect building a structure. Quote, it is necessary that the entire structure should not collapse from an improperly placed arch, that the particulars should not obscure the whole, that the most unsymmetrical and disturbing project should be realized by conscious and regular means. Throughout the article, Kuzmin argues for the importance of logic in creating a literary work. Set against the chaos and dismemberment of some artists, Rashiplonist, Kuzmin believes that it is the artists who give the world orderliness and harmoniousness, Stroinost, that leads one to clarity. Kuzmin asserts that the goal of all artists is to understand the world, the complex and beautiful world which, accepting or not, artists strive to know, to see in their own way, and to imprint. In Kuzmin's division of two kinds of artists, he is critiquing artists who intentionally make the literary work confusing in order to hide a greater message that, in reality, is not there. Kuzmin writes of these artists, would not a suspicious person claim that the author is putting fog about in order to force one not to understand something which does not contain anything particularly worth understanding? This lack of fit between form and content, the absence of contours, unnecessary fog, and acrobatic syntax could be called by not a very pretty name. We modestly term it tastelessness. Here we start to reach a more concrete understanding of how Stroinost does or does not appear in a literary work. Rationalist in literature is marked by unnecessary additions and boundarylessness. Moreover, it is characterized by a certain unfamiliar and contorted syntax. From this description of Rationalist in literature, we can prescribe the opposite characteristics to Stroinost. No unnecessary additions that do not contribute to the singular idea of the work, limits, boundaries, and laws that the artist works in accordance with, and an ordering of words, events, scenes that is not contorted, but rather appears organically from the artist's mind to the page. The differences between Stroinost and Rationalist can be understood as the difference between division and singularity. The term Rationalist itself connotes a division and dismemberment of parts. Stroinost connotes an attention to the whole, wherein the many parts contribute to the construction of a single structure or idea. In On Beautiful Clarity, Kuzmin notes that the techniques of prose have not been studied in this way as the laws and techniques of poetry have. Kuzmin employs his aesthetic theory in his novel Wings. The novel's form predates Montage. It lacks a clear linear plot and internal insights of characters. It tells a story of transformation through short conversations, monologues, physical descriptions, and romantic philosophical conversations. It tells a semi-autobiographical story of a boy, Vanya, who comes to know his own homosexuality through his relationship with Vadion Stroop, a half-Englishman. In his first meeting with Vanya, Stroop describes for him the difference between translations and texts in the original language. He tells him, instead of a man with flesh and blood, laughing or sullen, who can be loved, kissed, hated, and in whom one can see the blood flowing in the veins and the natural grace of the naked body, to have a soulless puppet, often made with the hands of a hack. There you have translations. Similar to Kuzmin's distinction between two kinds of artists in On Beautiful Clarity, Stroop makes a distinction between two kinds of texts, translated and original texts. Despite this difference, Stroop and Kuzmin's distinctions bear a close similarity in their value of the text. 3 years before On Beautiful Clarity, Kuzmin, through Stroop, places value on a similar organicity of the text that is of utmost importance. The organicity of the text is preserved in the transformation from the author's mind to the page. For Kuzmin, a translation of the text is nothing more than an unfamiliar and contorted syntax, imposed upon the text that rips out the text's soul from its body, as it were. Furthermore, Stroop makes a clear comparison between the book and the body. The untranslated text, presuming it is constructed with the laws of Stroinost, is akin to a figure that has within it the organicity, natural grace, and logic required for one to reach beautiful clarity. The metaphor of book and body extends the use of the text and the form of its relationship with a person. Because of the text's bodily form, it can be loved, kissed, hated, like the man with flesh and blood. Stroop suggests that not only are original texts more organic and pure, but they presume a more intimate and erotic relationship with the reader. The naked human body, containing within it an unaltered and pure beauty, and the unaltered text, constructed with the laws of Stroinost and beautiful clarity, both provide worlds of beauty for young learners like Vanya to become a perfectly modern man. Wings, from its very first line, establishes itself and its protagonist in transition. The first line reads, "It was getting lighter and lighter in the carriage, which had emptied somewhat towards morning." The reader is dropped in a train carriage with Vanya in flux between two spheres, home and Petersburg. The materials of the train carriage lead Vanya to reminisce of home. And the tightly strapped suitcases, the belted cushions, the old gentleman with long hair and an outdated shoulder bag sitting opposite, all spoke of a more prolonged voyage, of an expedition that was less habitual and more epoch-making. Looking at the reddish ray of the sun, its uneven glow flickering through clouds of locomotive steam, at the face of Nikolai Ivanovich, silly now as he slept, Vanya remembered the rasping voice of the same cousin who had told him in the entrance hall, there, far away, at home. Thereafter proceeds a montage of quotes that Vanya had been told by Nikolai at home. This particular mechanism by which Vanya intakes a variety of external stimuli and transports to a singular location, here, home, is a repeated mechanism throughout Wings. The various parts and sensations of the train station, the suitcases, the old gentleman, the bags, the sun, and Nikolai himself, contribute to a whole concrete category. Indeed, home is bracketed off by quotes in the text to preserve its structural integrity. Vanya experiences a similar urge of sensations when he enters Stroop's apartment. The room is filled with a male voice who is singing a stanza from Kuzmin's own poetry cycle, Alexandrian Songs. Vanya experiences, quote, the overlapping conversation of male voices as all the sensations of the room begin to merge. How he loved this spacious, greenish room filled with sounds of Rameau and Debussy, this study with books right up to the ceiling, this dining room in all red copper, these tales of Italy, Egypt, India, these raptures over any acute beauty of any country and any time, these walks to the islands, this smile on an unattractive face, this scent of purees spent with the breath of decay, how he loved it all, sio eta, not understanding, but obscurely captivated. This textual montage of sensations blurs the distinction between the objective space, in this case, the room at this very moment, and the subjective and transcendental feelings these raptures relay onto Vanya's consciousness. Each sensation in the room, visual, audio, etc., overlaps and fills Vanya with the love of it all. As the string of descriptions in the room continues, Vanya begins to include things not in the room, such as walks to the islands or the characteristics of Stroop himself. This mechanism is the same by which Vanya was reminded of home in the train car. The external stimuli of Stroop's study spur within Vanya a whole and singular love of it all. The music, poetry, artists and musicians, alluring discussions, and Stroop, when experienced together, relay onto Vanya's consciousness a singular and undivided concept. Through this repeated montage effect in Wings, Kuzmin studies the process by which his protagonist consumes his external world and seeks to understand it. The montage effect acts as a law in the novel, by which Kuzmin structures his protagonist's journey. Furthermore, the descriptions of the room that transform into descriptions of Stroop's figure underline the importance of the body in Stroinost. In that same study, Stroop monologues to the group in a defining statement of community. He says, we are Hellenes, lovers of the beautiful, bacchanals of the future life, like the clairvoyants, Jasnovidine, literally, clear seeing, clear vision, of Klinger and Toma. There is the land of our forefathers, flooded in sunlight and freedom, with beautiful, bold people, and across the seas, through mist and murk, we are going there. Argonauts, and in the mist, and in the most unheard of novelty, we recognize our most ancient roots, and in the most unprecedented radiance, we sense our fatherland. Stroop's monologue encapsulates the mission of these modern men, a constant act of becoming, through mist and murk, like the smoky and dark corners of Petersburg. There is no mention of arriving or setting off, but rather these modern men are always going there. There is no finality here, no good and evil. The men cannot finally arrive, they can only sense it in brief moments, as Vanya senses something long unseen, half forgotten in his other moments of study. The ancient roots recognized by the modern men span across all times and spaces, Greek epic, Italian Renaissance, Shakespeare, and these ancient roots are brought to the present at once and felt in a whirlwind of sensation that merges arts of the past with love of the present to sense a clear beauty. Stroop's declaration of community centers this group of men around a love of clarity in texts, music, conversations, spaces, and figures, all the sensations that Vanya scans in the room. Indeed, the men envision themselves with the clairvoyance, again, clear vision of other artists, endowed with a special ability to sense beautiful clarity. Through Vanya's interaction with texts and bodies, he begins to enter this community of Hellenes. The intentional use of fatherland signifies a longing for an imagined community that is something like a state, albeit a transcendental internal state that is reached through a personal form of reading and study of certain kinds of texts. While looking for Stroop in a homoerotic men's bathhouse, she stumbles upon the striking figure, Fyodor. Vanya saw quick and furtive gray eyes, dark hair cut in a fringe, and a beautifully drawn mouth. Although Vanya looked with prejudice at those furtive, gentle eyes and the impudent grin of the mouth, there was something both in the face and the tall figure as a whole, of the shapeliness, Stroinost, of which was striking even beneath the jacket, that captivated you and made you feel embarrassed. Similar to the sensations in the train car and Stroop's study, the parts of the body, the mouth, gray and furtive eyes, dark hair, lead Vanya to a comprehension of the whole figure. The Stroinost that strikes Vanya appears only after a succession of the various parts in a montage sequence, similar to the various parts of Stroop's study and the train car to Petersburg. Furthermore, the Stroinost only describes the naked figure beneath the jacket, as it is this unaltered and pure form of the body that contains within it Stroinost. A statue of a figure appears at the end of Wings. Vanya's guide, Orsini, describes the statue thus. The crimson blood can be seen gushing beneath the white skin, where all the muscles are intoxicatingly captivating and where we moderns aren't put off by the absence of arms and a head. The body itself, matter, will perish, and works of art, Phidias, Mozart, Shakespeare, let's say, will perish. But the idea, the type of beauty enshrined in them cannot perish, and that is perhaps the only valuable thing in the changing and transient diversity of life. The statue, here the body itself, and works of art will similarly perish as material objects. However, both contain within them a similar idea of beauty that transcends material deterioration. In this passage, Kuzmin makes a clear distinction between form, or the material form that art expresses itself through, and content, the eternal beauty enshrined in the material object. Throughout Wings, Vanya reaches higher internal states of beauty and love through a montage of material sensations. This formula can be understood as the method by which Vanya reaches visions and worlds of beauty within the novel. Furthermore, this formula can be understood as the intention of the novel itself and its effect on its readers. The textual montage form of Wings is necessary for the idea of beauty to be relayed onto the reader. In On Beautiful Clarity, Kuzmin argues that the texts that succeed in this task should be constructed by the law of Stroinost, the same law that is used to explain the proportionate construction of the body. Through the groundbreaking novel Wings, Kuzmin posits a theory of aesthetic creation that relies on a particular form of textual montage in prose to glimpse a higher state of beauty, never depicted, but summoned by a string of images.
Our next speaker is going to be Tova Tachau, who is a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences studying biochemistry and comparative literature. And it's lately been revealed that she will be a submatriculant in comparative literature to complete an MA in it next year, if the data systems comply with our wishes, but we hope that they will. Tova's research interests encompass total organic synthesis and drug discovery alongside the Russian avant-garde, namely the volatility of art and language in Russian futurism. She also dabbles in Marxian theory. Just as organic chemistry provides the building blocks for novel biological molecules, Tova finds that Soviet-era art and literature yield the tools to synthesize novel perspectives on the past. In 5 years, you'll probably find Tova in one of the following pursuits: studying to obtain a medical degree, following the footsteps of one of her favorite authors, Mikhail Bulgakov, working as a paragliding instructor in Switzerland, performing in Cirque du Soleil, or any combination of the above. Outside of her classroom studies here at Penn, Tova enjoys training in circus arts, in particular rope, trapeze, and silks, hiking with her dog Charlie, and reading outdoors. Tova is going to present a paper on the futurists' dynamism of dimensionality, embryos of artistic possibility in Malevich and Khrebnikov.
That bio was written like a year ago, so needless to say, some things have changed, and I'm very happy to find myself here at a humanities research conference that has nothing to do with chemistry. And with that, I will go ahead and get started. For the sake of time, I'm going to be limiting my discussion today to embryos of artistic possibility in Kazimir Malevich. And to get started, in his 1915 essay, From Cubism and Futurism to Suprematism, Russian-Ukrainian artist, theorist, and futurist Kazimir Malevich declared that, this will work. There we go. Malevich declared that the new life of iron and the machine, the roar of automobiles, the glitter of electric lights, the whirring of propellers have awoken the soul. Malevich here captures precisely how the acceleration of life, ushered in by trains, automobiles, and airplanes in the early 20th century, spurred a rapid evolution of the human psyche, requiring an analogous revitalization in the field of art. Preceding generations of Impressionists and Symbolists had largely sought to interpret the soul, but Russian futurists were charged with creating it and expanding it. The aesthetics of Russian futurism thus reflected a novel perception of the newly mechanized universe. And to best capture this aesthetic novelty, the futurists enacted a theoretical transformation of the human sensory apparatus itself, opening a way for the realistic perception of the world in its newly quintessential chaos and speed. While we traditionally apprehend the world in 3 dimensions, along with the 4th dimension of time, futurist artists engaged in experimentation with these very defining axes of cognition to expand human phenomenology beyond these natural confines. So though Malevich was a prominent member of the Russian futurist movement, he took the experimental nature of his milieu to extreme in 1915 with the introduction of a competing artistic movement called Suprematism. At the 010 exhibition, otherwise known as the last futurist exhibition of paintings, Suprematism, which defined itself as distinct from futurism at large, formally diverged from the overarching ethos of the avant-garde in its innovative prioritization of pure feeling over visual phenomena, captured through geometric abstraction, deliberate coloration, and the complete rejection of representational forms. Amid this framework, Malevich theorized a 5th dimension, which he named economy, as a way to escape the spatio-temporal realm, to transgress what he called the zero of form, and to thereby emerge into a new, purely non-objective world. Economy, as Malevich hypothesizes, describes a primordial form of potential energy, and the primacy of feeling he sought to capture in Suprematism is encapsulated in this concept of economy as an emotive, energetic potential, accessible by colored forms that exist and draw the viewer into a 5-dimensional realm. Through the aesthetic restraint captured in his geometric abstractions, Malevich claims to harness this energy in the creation of artistic works of an emotionally intuitive nature. It is important to note, however, that this concept of economy does not refer merely to this technique of geometric abstraction, but rather introduces a new form of intuition necessary to escape the world of formal objects. Through his identification of the 5th dimension of economy, then, Malevich sought to empower his artistic creations to expand traditional phenomenology, thereby imbuing his art with the revolutionary potential to escape existing dimensions by modeling a new one. It is worth noting that at the turn of the 20th century, had already seen avid debate surrounding the 4th dimension among the avant-garde. In 1915, Malevich titled a great number of his suprematic works, Color Masses in the 4th Dimension. So there's an interesting contradiction that thus arises in the theorization of suprematism. Did Malevich intend for suprematism to access 1, the 4th dimension, as suggested by the titles of his early works, 2, the 5th dimension, as in his later theoretical writings, or 3, both at separate instances in time? How precisely, then, does the 5th economy function in Malevich's art, and what are the ramifications of this phenomenological revolution? In this project, I present a reading of Malevich's 5th dimension as an innovative expansion of contemporary higher space discourse that revolutionized phenomenological theory into a broader cosmological framework via uniquely retrospective and dialectical methodology that is symptomatic, as I will show, of Malevich's creative anxieties. To this end, I will first outline Malevich's artistic evolution. Analyzing this artistic evolution reveals Malevich's tendency to mutate time, which is sometimes referred to as Malevich's mysticism, by deliberately misstating paintings and erasing entire chapters from his writings. Malevich, through this manipulation of time as a concept, leaves us with a carefully curated oeuvre and biography that yields a somewhat artificially organized presentation of his artistic development, but one that optimally aligns with his theoretical maturation and thereby reveals certain creative anxieties concerning the linear development of his work. Secondly, this artistic evolution will be analyzed through the development of his theoretical writings. From critiquing the mimetic work of the savage, founded in utilitarian reason, I argue that Malevich discerns the need to escape these natural fetters and thereby access a new form of reason, namely intuitive reason, the cognitive apparatus that realizes what he designates as the 5th dimension of economy. Finally, Malevich discerns the true power of suprematism and economy in its universally accessible nature, which extrapolates this artistic movement into the realm of life itself. Suprematic forms, according to Malevich, are autonomous creations which transmit novel, emotive intuitions from the artist to any viewer, revolutionizing the limits of phenomenology itself by training the viewer into a novel perceptual apparatus. So I will begin with a brief outline of Malevich's artistic maturation. Early on, Malevich betrays a certain apprehension concerning the interference of cognitive associations of the natural world in painting. In particular, the impressionistic tendency to depict the likeness of nature as opposed to painting as such led Malevich to investigate the existence of independent forms in nature that could inhabit a different mode of reality created via alogisms, that is to say, deliberately irrational creations, which he explores in his later works. Malevich continued to experiment loosely with Impressionism until his move to Moscow in 1904, where his early impressionistic tendencies began to morph into a hybrid neo-impressionistic Fauvist primitivist style encapsulated in his Peasant Ghost series. His search for a new reality in painting led him progressively further away from academic realism as his style grew increasingly geometricized after 1910, aligning closely with Cubo-Futurist style. During these years of artistic experimentation, Malevich created a novel movement known as Februalism, named after the month of February, where Malevich, with a spoon attached to his lapel in Futurist style, rejected reason in a public lecture at the Jack of Diamonds Futurist debate. Februalism revealed his proto-cubist style compounded with visual alogisms and absurdism, aiming for the destruction of the rational worldview. These works featured a series of geometric shapes, Slavic letters, and modern random cubist forms, remaining well within the realm of traditional objects while simultaneously challenging their utilitarian purposes. Notably, Malevich later attempted to erase this movement from his theoretical and biographical writings. He retroactively revised his artistic evolution to comprise a more linear development towards his ultimate creation, namely suprematism. Along with a habit of deliberately misdating his later works, this theoretical revision exposes Malevich's tendency to distort the linearity of time in his development from Cubism and Futurism to Suprematism, as his theoretical essay is named. Februalism reveals a certain detour from the progression of geometric abstraction shown here, with its inclusion of Slavic letters and eclectic, though recognizable forms. However, Malevich abandoned this experimentation in absurdism in pursuit of a more intuitive art, according to him, namely suprematism. And now I will turn to the development of Malevich's artistic theory, which, as you can see, was highly subject to authorly manipulation. Malevich begins his theoretical critique in his 1915 paper From Cubism and Futurism to Suprematism, The New Painterly Realism, with a brief historical account of what he calls the savage, of what he calls the art of the savage, as mere primitive attempts in naturalism, which pervert the dynamic state of nature by capturing its dead image. The goal of the savage artist, however misguided, revealed a crucial aspect of the creative process. If art was trapped in its pursuit of a perfect reproduction of nature, any renderings of nature were required to conform to the confines of human cognition. All works must abide by the three-dimensional framework and physical laws of the natural world, or what Malevich called utilitarian reason. In this sense, what he referred to as the ring of the horizon became a fetter due to the seemingly immutable system of human perception. Malevich believed that these instinctual utilitarian schemata represented only a small fraction of man's potential, and that creative productions should instead draw from the entirety of the human psyche, not merely the limited logic of survival. To this end, Malevich attempts to free intuition from the shackles of utilitarian reason via suprematism, which triumphs over objectivity in art. Beyond the realm of objects, suprematist forms exist in an entirely new dimension governed by a new form of logic. Under this framework, suprematism becomes not only an aesthetic, but also a phenomenological and cosmological methodology for expanding human perception beyond the earthly realm governed by utilitarian reason and into a pseudo-noumenal one governed by intuitive reason. To this end, Malevich outlined an experimental method for escaping the fetters of utilitarian reason. First and foremost, an artist must avoid representational forms and essentially remove themselves from the spatio-temporal world governed by French philosopher Henry Bergson's concept of the logic of solid bodies. As he said, objects tie the mind to the limited form of reason, and thus any objectified subject necessarily restricts the artist to thinking and creating in the utilitarian realm. This strategy is similar to Bergson's description of the extinction of the self, or precisely what Malevich achieved in suprematism when he declared to have captured the zero of form. Only after an artist expands their perceptual apparatus via this method can they attempt to physically recreate their novel cosmological interpretation on a canvas. Importantly, this act of recreation is not synonymous with the savage artist's attempts to reproduce nature, but rather a method of theorizing new life. In suprematism, according to Malevich, creating means living, eternally creating newer and newer forms. Malevich therefore distinguishes suprematist production as a process of primordial creation. According to his declaration of suprematic victory, I transformed myself in the zero form and emerged from nothing to creation. That is to suprematism, to the new realism in painting, to non-objective creation. Suprematism is the beginning of a new culture, and the savage is conquered like an ape. Malevich's theory here develops a dialectical undertone in that the savage curated the art of simple reproduction, and from the conquering of this mode of representation by the primitivistic cubo-futurist forces, Malevich derived the zero form, where pure intuition takes shape. And from this void, armed with intuitive rather than utilitarian reason, Malevich emerged into the realm of non-objective creation, where suprematic forms come alive. Suprematism becomes an art of becoming, marking the creation of living, autonomous forms. Though he supposedly started creating works in late 1913, Malevich did not formally theorize the fifth dimension of economy or the movement of suprematism as such until 1915, and there remains scholarly debate surrounding when he actually began producing suprematist works. Nonetheless, through his 1915 notion of economy as probably the primary source of all action, in his words, Malevich's suprematist works sought to empower his viewers to experience an analogous intuitive expansion, developing the capacity to comprehend the painting's inherent alogisms for themselves. The viewer cultivates the capacity to himself discern what Malevich called the transcendent order, which he discovered during his creative process. At the 010 exhibition, he declared, standing on the economic suprematist plane of the square as absolute expression of modernity, I leave it to serve as the basis for the economic extension of life's action. I declare economy to be the fifth dimension which evaluates and defines the modernity of the arts and creative works. The foundation of Malevich's newfound transcendent order, therefore, relies on this expanded form of intuition. Importantly, this theorization of the fifth dimension is distinct from the contemporary discourse surrounding the fourth dimension, as economy becomes a new phenomenological and cosmological framework. While to many of his contemporaries, the fourth dimension relies on the movement of three-dimensional forms as a mechanism of stripping an object of its utilitarian associations, economy marks the distillation of pure energy, independent of any formal inspiration, and emerging from this newfound transcendent order of the cosmos. Importantly, Malevich's Black Square, which is emblematic of his fifth dimension in his later writings, was titled Black Square at the 010 exhibition and did not reference the fourth dimension, unlike his other works exhibited concurrently. Thus, economy marks the further abstraction of the fourth dimension, a phenomenological framework, into an entire cosmological framework. While the fourth dimension relied on momentum, so to speak, the fifth dimension captures the fundamental potential energy responsible for such motion. Therefore, economy becomes the means by which a viewer can perceive suprematic forms via an expansion of consciousness, which is the same supraconsciousness that Malevich utilizes in his creative process. In this way, each suprematic piece can empower any viewer to escape the bounds of utilitarian reason. Notably, the comprehension of the fifth dimension is not a passive process, but one that requires active engagement on the part of the viewer. With regard to Malevich's best-known suprematist composition, he says that the square is not a subconscious form, it is the creation of intuitive reason. And this the viewer can only become conscious of upon expanding their own perceptual apparatus. Malevich further believes the novel dimension of economy holds the potential to envelop the entire world in an aesthetic revolution of sorts. He states that world energy is moving towards economy, and every step it takes toward the indefinite is expressed in the new economic culture of signs. A revolution is simply a solution to new economic energy rocked by world intuition. Economy, as this dimension heralding the universal expansion of consciousness, escapes the artistic bound of suprematism itself and encompasses the entirety of world energy, redefining Malevich's movement as a mass cultural transformation rather than a single invention of the avant-garde. This inspires Malevich's declaration that all creative processes should follow the new dimension, and artists should convene what he calls an economic council of creativity to liquidate all the arts of the old world. Suprematism becomes a modernizing liberation, not only for artists, but also for civilians alike, as Malevich recognizes in every man the ability to make discoveries and to announce that unlimited amounts of material will be found both in and above the earth to bring them to fruition. This rhetorical move thus universalizes the mission of the suprematist artist. As Malevich's mentee and prominent avant-garde artist El Lissitzky comments, suprematism was a clear sign and plan for a definite new world never before experienced, or a new cosmic creation empowered by the fifth dimension of economy to transgress the limits imposed not only by the utilitarian world, but also by the expanded fourth dimensional realm and spur a revolution of world intuition. Thank you.
So our last presenter for this panel is Victoria Avanesov, I'm sorry, a sophomore in the College of Arts and Sciences from Erie, Pennsylvania, who's pursuing a degree in comparative literature and philosophy. Victoria's primary academic interest lies in the realm of aesthetics and the dissemination of artistic expression to a broader mass audience. In exploring this interest, Victoria immerses herself in trying to understand various artistic forms, including, but not limited to, painting, drawing, music, theater, and literature. Her research is dedicated to probing the communicability of these various media across different historical epochs, encompassing a spectrum of artistic movements and examining how these movements can be contextualized in the modern era. In her free time, she enjoys reading, drawing, and taking nature walks. Victoria is going to be presenting her paper on Victory Over the Sun, Reimagining Russian Suprematist Works Through Hermeneutics.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today, and I have the honor of presenting last today. And you have the honor of hearing me butcher a bunch of Eastern European names, so I'm sorry about that, but that's pretty much what this is going to be. So before I start on my academic research, I would like to say a few words about this year's theme. Today's theme of revolution is reflective of the transformative nature of our academic work and its broader implications on society and our individual lives. To be truly revolutionary is to engage in rigorous self-examination of established norms and to champion intentional and mindful change. This metamorphosis of perspective is especially significant in academia, where our deep dives into specialized subjects accumulate in firm analytical assertions. So my initial interest with the Russian avant-garde began over 1 year ago when researching for Professor Kristen Godsey's first-year seminar on the Iron Curtain. I've always been interested in art as a self-proclaimed artist, but since then my research interests have expanded into a more comprehensive analysis of creative theory and practice. This journey has led to a fundamental reconstitution of my original thesis for this project, echoing the very nature of the revolution that it studies. And so this presentation is not only about Victory Over the Sun, this is a presentation that's been crafted on a basis of reflection on the inner mechanics of our minds, the analytical processes that dictate the timing and impact of revolutionary changes, the kind of subtle shifts that can initiate a domino effect of revolutionary thinking. And now I will begin my research. Okay, so an offshoot of Cuba futurism, the Suprematist movement in Russia commenced with the artistic endeavors of Kazimir Malevich circa 1913. The Suprematists sought to transcend traditional boundaries and conventions in art by dismantling established forms and cultivating novel ones. Arguably, the most renowned manifestation of Russian suprematist or futurist art emanates from Malevich's creation, Black Square, which concentrated on reducing art to an absolute zero, returning to the fundamental essence of art itself. While Black Square stands as the quintessential example of this return to an absolute zero, the Suprematists were equally enthusiastic about experimenting with diverse art forms. So in the words of Gerald Janicek in his work Zaum, the transrational poetry of Russian futurism, the Suprematists delved into linguistic experimentation through forms of artistic language termed Zaum, chiefly pioneered by Russian poet Alexei Kruchenik. Translated as beyond the mind or transrational, Zaum has been considered akin to abstractionism in language, with a Kruchenik Zaum poem regarded as the linguistic equivalent of Malevich's Black Square. And as Janacek puts it, the goal is to achieve a certain objectivity in creating a universalizing form of language. So one particularly noteworthy manifestation of this experimental language is evident in Victory Over the Sun, an interdisciplinary opera that represented a accumulation of talents at the time, including Matyushin, Malevich, Kruchenik, and Hlyebnikov. Indeed, the opera's composer, Matyushin, argued that the production united all the main tendencies of contemporary art. This opera was only shown twice, on December 3rd and 5th in Luna Park in St. Petersburg, and it was met with many boos and insults during its performances, with the Russian public viewing the futurists as outrageous bohemian challengers of its conformism. I feel that the best way to sum up this opera is to read a contemporary review from a St. Petersburg newspaper, which read, quote, "The opera Victory Over the Sun lacks plot development of any kind. Its meaning is to overthrow one of the main artistic values, here the sun. Practical and scientific thought orders the world and demarcates it into separate things and objects. The futurists want to liberate themselves from the orderliness of the world, from the connections that are thought in it. They wish to transform the world into chaos, to smash established values from them, making new generalizations, discovering new, unexpected, and invisible connections. This is why the sun, a form of value, retains them and why they want to overthrow it. The process of overthrowing the sun, therefore, serves as the subject of the opera. The characters of the opera are able to express it with words and sounds," end quote. So the revival of this opera took place in the 1980s under the direction of Robert Bendetti, who enlisted a cast of Cal Arts students to perform in it. Bendetti characterized Kruchenik's style of language as having the ability to communicate the speaker's internal state directly, often departing from narrative logic and at times disintegrating into abstract imagery and pure emotive sound. So in simpler terms, Kruchenik's style involves the creation of new words and the deconstruction of syntax to transcend conventional boundaries in expressing feelings and ideas through sound. So the deliberate use of novel language dismantled syntax to depart from established norms, enabling a more direct and unfiltered portrayal of the speaker's internal state. Okay, so despite the favorable reception and the apparent vitality of the 1983 reconstruction of the opera, it has faced criticism for its rigidity in its English translation. For instance, Anna Kisselgoff of the New York Times opines, had this production been presented in Russian rather than English, the significance of its literary foundation would be more evident. And echoing a similar sentiment, Eva Bezverkny contends that opting for an English translation for the opera seemed counterproductive to the specific jagged rhythmic sounds and effects of poetry when read aloud, and carried a particular meaning or lack thereof because of the Za translation in Russian. Another issue from the translation of Victory Over the Sun is expressed from the primary translator herself, Larissa Shmylo. Beyond the inherent challenges in translating the irregularities of the Za style, Shmylo notes that Kruchenik masculinized female and neuter adjectives and nouns. For instance, he transformed the grammatically neuter word for lake, which is ozera, into a masculine form, ozer. In addition to this, the 10th land, the country of the future in the opera, is desite stran instead of the feminine desitaya strana. Shmylo underscores that both Kruchenik and Hlyebnikov's stylistic choices, as evident in their manifesto, the word as such, were ideologically misogynistic. In response to the negative criticisms received following the staging of Victory Over the Sun, the creators wrote, "Delving into the eternally playful tone of our critics, we can infer from their opinions about language, and we will notice that all of their requirements are more applicable to women as such than to language as such. Indeed, clear, pure, honest, Stroinost, pleasant, tender, finally juicy and colorful." Indeed, this lack of propriety towards women is no surprise when one looks further into the Russian avant-garde. In fact, Shmylo writes that Kruchenik was exceptionally proud that there were no female characters in Victory. At a time when the defeat of Russia by Japan in the 1905 war mentioned in Victory loomed large in the Russian consciousness, the futurists were martial, misogynistic, embracing technology and damning the feminine and biological. In fact, translated by Shmylo from Victory, an excerpt from the opera, for instance, goes as following. Everything's become masculine. The lake is harder than iron. Don't believe the old measures. The Russian avant-garde embodies a masculine, mechanistic, speed-focused energy reflective of the movement's celebration of the industrial age and the dynamism of modern life. The rejection of traditional forms and embrace of dynamic, energetic expressions in futurist art align with the attributes traditionally associated with masculinity, such as power and progress. While these aspects reveal the movement's fascination with a particular form of energy, the potential for misogyny lies in the broader cultural context of the early 20th century, where traditional gender roles were often relegated to women, were outside of the listed virtues of mechanistic speed and mechanical power. This line of thinking aligns closely with the Italian futurists, where strong anti-feminist views were pervasive in portraying women as obstacles to progress. So how should one navigate a text steeped in such ideological misogyny? Can Schmeiler's translation be refined to address feminist critiques while preserving the jagged rhythmic sounds intrinsic to the Zaum style? This research contends that crafting a feminist rendition of the text, despite its inherent subjectivity in doing so, may clash with the universalizing and objective goals of the Zaum language, but nonetheless, the argument posits that such a translation is not only possible, but revolutionary, proposing a synthesis that retains Zaum's objectivity and essence while integrating the necessary subjectivity and ideological resistance inherent in a feminist reinterpretation. Feminist interpretation, sorry. This study will specifically focus on morphological Zaum involving alterations of select morphemes to accentuate the harsh masculinity embraced by the futurists. The aim is to demonstrate that a nuanced translation of Victory Over the Sun can maintain the objectivity and core characteristics of Zaum while simultaneously incorporating the subjective nuances and ideological challenges essential to a feminist reinterpretation of the text. Language is said to fit closer to the futurist style, according to Kruchenik, when it embraces the following on this list. This study will only focus on the morphological variations of the Zaum text falling under the category of sudden neologistic activity, in which only select morphemes of word are altered in order to convey specific meanings, such as the ozera, ozer example I mentioned prior. This narrows the scope of the study, and probably more importantly, is good at helping me solve one problem at a time when it comes to the complexity of translating concrete poetry. Kirsten Malmkjær's work, Translating Concrete Poetry, delves into the intricate challenges faced in, you guessed it, translating concrete poetry, a genre that accentuates the physical and visual facets of language, contradicting the conventional notion that poetry's essence is invariably compromised in translation due to the distinct phonetics of the source language. Malmkjær posits that the aim of concrete poetry is to provoke universal cognitive responses. Its aim to produce universal cognitive responses should theoretically permit its meaningful transposition across cultural landscapes. Her examination foregrounds the subjective and imaginative aspects that characterize the act of translation. Advocating for a paradigm shift, she proposes that translations could be approached as intentive interpretations, which can enrich the engagement with the text within the cultural milieu of the target language. In parallel, in the domain of feminist translation, the domain of feminist translation is thoroughly examined through Ursula Palachek's study of Olga Tokarczuk's House of Day, House of Night. Palachek emphasizes the critical nature of translating gendered language accurately, considering that the grammatical gender system provides invaluable insight into the social constructs of gender. The crux lies in conveying gender-specific grammatical structures into a gender-neutral language without diluting the subtleties inherent in the source material. Palachek laments that the English rendition of Tokarczuk's seminal feminist work diminishes its original profundity. This complaint echoes a similar one expressed in the original reviews for the Schmeiler translation, saying that the jagged rhythm of the original was lost. Tokarczuk's linguistic innovation manifest in neologisms like grisbosk, mushroomness, which is a made-up word, is a testament to her strategy of transcending the challenging gendered linguistic barriers. This novel approach resonates with the Zaum style, which champions the genesis of new words to express ineffable ideas, thereby requiring localized translation techniques to faithfully represent the text's ideological core. Nevertheless, Palachek's analysis underscores the significance of subjectivity in feminist translations, a subjectivity that intriguingly contrasts with the ideological objectivity and universality sought by Zaum. This idea of localized translation and its inherent subjectivity seems to conflict with the objectivity and universalization that Zalmus strives to achieve, as I mentioned. This also conflicts with the subjectivity necessary in order to translate a text through a feminist lens. However, my proposed solution provides a loophole. First, one would have to note the alterations of the morpheme in the original text. Next, one would have to note what the original word translates to in English. Finally, one would have to emphasize, and the keynote is emphasize, that original morphological change in the English language somehow, perhaps through the genesis of new words. So in applying this to victory, we take a look at this example. We identify the root word and its morphological change being desite strana to desite stran. Then we translate that word into English, which is the 10th land. After this, the translator alters the text in a way that emphasizes the original masculine energy of the original. In this way, the harshness and jagged rhythm of the original Russian translation is maintained while adding the subjectivity necessary in order to make it a feminist translation. Maintaining the essence of the original and including the additions of harsh masculine energy emphasizes this period as being one that was characteristically misogynistic, thereby making this misogynistic text paradoxically feminist by presenting it in its true essence. The number 3 on the slide shows all the possible variations of the translator could utilize. My personal favorite would be the last one, where all of the vowels which are associated with the feminine typically are taken out of the English translation, thereby retaining some of the energy of Zaum in the English translation. So by proposing a translation methodology that retains the objectivity and essence of Zaum while integrating feminist critical perspectives, I embrace the notion that translation is an act of creation, a revolution in its own right. It's about the courage to engage with the text in a way that both honors its origins and enriches its new linguistic and cultural setting. And that was my presentation. So I thank you for listening.
How many people are watching in the Zoom?
Just a few. Is it on? Yes. To all of the panelists, all of you chose to focus on the art and aesthetic traditions of the early 20th century. We think of these years as a tremendously innovative era, a time when avant-garde movements were flourishing and traditional notions of art and the aesthetic were in flux. Fast forward to the 21st century, many cultural critics, Mark Fisher, Kyle Chaika, have suggested we are living in an era of cultural stagnation, where the experimental and innovative energies of the 20th century have dissipated, and we now just endlessly recycle the cultural and artistic forms of the past. Think about the nonstop sequels at the box office, old TV shows being rebooted, musical artists embracing retro styles, etc. In studying these intellectual and artistic movements of the past century, what insights did it give you about our own time? Do you guys think we are living in an era of stagnant culture? If so, do you think these artistic movements of the past have something to teach us about being innovative once again, that is, making art revolutionary? How do we recapture the spirit of the early 20th century modernists and avant-garde?
Who wants to go first?
Start. I could start. That's interesting. I would respond firstly by saying that at least intuitively, I don't agree right away of Mark Fisher's or any others and plenty others. This sort of like postmodern, everything is being recreated all the time and we're not having anything new. I mean, I think it's totally possible to even look at like Malevich's Black Square and without reading any of his, art, non-objective world and or all these sorts of strange texts, these things may also become off as very strange works of art that aren't coming from any sort of originality that was considered, agreed upon beforehand. So in that way, I would just maybe push back a little bit that this question of originality in art is much less to do about the actual production of art and its actual originality, but more so its popular viewership and the ways that viewers and consumers of art, what again, like the what kind of movies people want to see, like why are movies like the art, like Marvel movies that keep on continuously putting out sequels are only responding to the market desire for those sorts of things. So that's I'll end with that, but that's just my immediate response.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that if engaging with the incredibly challenging and at times contradictory work of Malevich has taught me anything, it's that when you look at a work of art that's a little bit strange or, unsettling or unknown, which to me contemporary art is. I'm not at all well versed in anything contemporary art, but you have to try and engage with it on the artist level. It's about like this kind of, he talks about like co-creation along with the artists themselves. And that's precisely what his works were trying to do, is trying to teach you something about the structure of the universe. And it's about engaging with the work on the level of the artist. And so in that sense, I don't think that I don't think that there has been a stagnation in contemporary art insofar as the level of its textual value per se. For a more anecdotal response, we were lucky enough at the Wolf Humanities Center to welcome Katie Trugrove and later a scholar from Yale on the new avant-garde in contemporary poetry, which is something that I was completely unfamiliar with, and which undoubtedly challenged my perception as a I'm not incredibly well versed in reading poetry in general, let alone contemporary poetry, which is something very abstract, very unfamiliar. But through engaging with the poet herself and through engaging with a scholar who wrote extensively on this poet, I was able to kind of understand, like, wow, these people are really engaging with poetry as a kind of a more than just an art form, was like a political tool to react to current political events throughout the world, especially in Russia. And in that sense, I don't think there has been a stagnation at all, because they are still producing these works that are very unsettling, but when you engage with them on the level of the artist, very enlightening as well. And particular to our time, which, is not, has a plethora of challenges politically, which warrant a response in art.
Can you hear me? Going off of what Tova said, I agree with the general sentiment on the table that, there sort of hasn't been like I would say a real stagnation in contemporary art, and I would more so call it like a perceptive stagnation in contemporary art. And I would just, again, intuitively attribute that to like the crazy amounts of like information and how we're constantly being flooded with new information, and it seems like because of that nothing new is being generated, or everything is just a repeat of something old. But in thinking about how this relates to both my work and the present today, I would say in regards to my work, I thought about how, the futurists and suprematists, their main focus is to destroy the past. And under futurist and suprematist logic, in regards to my project, one could argue for a translation that so my argument is essentially keeping the essence of the original work, but one could just as easily argue to sort of take that essence and turn it into a completely new work through making it like a more like directly feminist translation that takes out like the misogynistic aspects of the work that I talked about. And so in that way, with all these small little changes that you could make to work that's already existing, I would argue that, the possibilities are endless in terms of creation. And also with the you know, amount of information that we are receiving on a daily basis and all of the wide variety of perspectives we receive through news and media cycles and the world as it's actually and actively changing. I think like the human consciousness just interprets that in a way that is maybe I'm being optimistic here, but incredibly generative in transforming new content.
Other questions? I had a couple of questions. Oh, wait, I'll let you go, Mila. Go ahead.
You can go. Can I go? Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so can you hear me? I have questions for each of you. I don't know where should I start? Maybe Liam, I'll start with the first presentation. So I'm curious about your definition of montage in view of the examples that you gave, because montage is some juxtaposition or assemblage of conflicts, right? That creates a conflict. But I very much like the text, but one particular quotation when Vanya, I think it's a recollection of all beautiful things. I forgot what it was, but it reads like a poetry. Like every sentence, if you put them one under another, it reads like a poetry, but it doesn't sound as a futurist style poetry to me. And I could see it as a harmonious and Stroinost poetry poem. So how would you explain to me why this is a montage, example of a montage? And also, well, another question. And another question is about music, and you analyze this term in the framework work human body, right? This Stroinost, this term. But what about the framework work of music and the meaning of Stroinost as musical harmony, especially since you mentioned those 18th century composers, Rameau, for example, right? So that's one question. I mean, these questions. Tova, and thank you very much, by the way. That was a fascinating presentations. I'm so happy to be here, like this event. And the question about how many dimensions are there, since if we're speaking about like fourth dimension, well, we understand what this is. And we can also think about multi-dimensional geometries, right? But since Malevich in 1919 specifically speaks about the fifth dimension, is it really a geometrical dimension? So something like above fourth dimension, or is it just like a metaphor since it's economy, right? This dimension. So is it only applicable to art as some form of art suprematism, right? In fact, with that aspect of being economical, of, I don't know, energy. So that's this question. And and Victoria, so I think it's a very important, it's very important to think about how to translate transnational language, of course. And whether keep it in Russian or like whatever we can do with Хлебников or Крученых. But in this particular case, first I'm curious, who's this 10th country? Is it did you find that, or did you read about that problem? This particular one? Yeah, because that,
I read it in the specific translation of the text, which I have here.
So this particular example is not yours, right? It's from the book.
Yeah, that's how it was actually like translated and written.
Oh, great. Yeah, because I'm afraid it's not a 10th country. It's genitive plural. It's those people are from 10 countries. So this particular example won't fit your argument, and I think it's a mistranslation in that book. But so my question is about the lake, the ozera that became masculine. Did you have a chance to look at the context? Because when you argue that this whole work is misogynist, then I'm curious, what if this particular masculine form occurs within a particular context, and this context, or maybe this character who says that, or I know characters, they like this change serves some purpose in that context, and it's not necessarily misogynist per se. And yeah, so yeah, these questions.
I'll start. Thank you again for the question about montage. This is productive. So you said that a few of these quotes, they come off less as this futurist full of conflict and how we understand montage, or how, you know, how it should be understood, and more so of a harmoniousness, fullness. So there's a few examples in these quotes where so back to my first answer to the question of montage, the montage works on micro levels and macro levels throughout the whole novel. So there are a few of the small scenes that I've pointed out here, where in the prose line of the text, there are a succession in these very, very long, almost paragraph long sentences, succession of various external stimuli. And even in here, there are some strange contradictions, conflicts, I should say. Not only, so like, he loved the spacious greenish room filled with the sounds of these composers, and then study of books, et cetera, of all these strange things, but even more direct conflicts, as such as this smile on an unattractive face, or this scent with the breath of decay. There are these small little strange, not very clear to Vanya conflicts that are more experiential rather than understood or knowledgeable. And in these little micro examples, they create, at least for Vanya, a love or a sensation or a feeling of some larger term for him or category for him. Sometimes it is it all. Sometimes it appears in quotes as home or as Petersburg. And then once these, the home in Petersburg is a good example. So the first example I have of the train car, he creates the, at least Vanya experiences all of these things in the train car that he's seeing, and then some memories of home, which again can be a conflict of he's thinking of things at home and he's also seeing things around him. And then they create for him all, you know, it thinks even the external things that he sees in the train car and the memories that he has with his cousin all become collapsed into at home for him. And then later on, a few sections later in the novel, he is, you know, reminiscing about home. And then there's another similar sort of sequence of all these external things that he sees when he gets to Petersburg, of like these dark and smoky alleys, and these factory men, and these workers, et cetera. And this creates for him Petersburg, again, as another, like, for him, a sort of a harnessing of external things into one word. And then there he kind of, not the narrator, but rather Vanya himself, through the omniscient narrator, sort of puts these two concepts that are both created from two different micro montage sequences in conflict, home and Petersburg. And then this process, that's one example of a larger process that kind of unravels throughout the novel. So that's how I understand it, but it needs a lot more, obviously, specificity in what sort of montage is being used, and when there's conflict and when there's not, and why exactly it is montage. To the question of music, it's a great question. As me and you both know, Kuzmin himself was a musician. His Alexandrian songs, he wrote music to his poems that was supposed to be, you know, they were supposed to be sung in lyric, with orchestra. And I mean, your question regarding music, was it about, I'm sorry, it was just, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mhm. Mhm. No, I think it's perfectly related. I think so. In the first comment I made about a distinction between Vanya knowing things and experiencing things, and this is a conflict that gets bring up a whole bunch of times in the novel. For example, Stroop tells him, "World's not only to know which, but to love which." Or when he reads Shakespeare, he understands very, very little, but suddenly his torrent of beauty sort of overtakes him. So in that way, music can be understood as like, it's not when you read Shakespeare there, he's not really reading the text, right? As we read texts like here as young scholars or as academics, but or novels or whatever. But it's a different sort of it presumes like a different relationship from the reader to whatever, or the listener, et cetera, with whatever they are in communion with. And I think this is where the metaphor of the body, which Kuzmin gets from Plato's Phaedrus and Socrates, comes to fruition, because there's a different, it's not just a reader reading a book, but there's I think at times, especially in Wing, sort of a sensual and erotic relationship that is between reader or listener and the object. So in that sense, music can be understood as just another, not a book, but rather it's like an easier way to, you don't have to understand, but rather to experience. Yeah.
So in response to your first question on just how many dimensions are there and how can we like think about that as people who are, trained to function with this kind of utilitarian three-dimensional apparatus. In terms of like the concrete math, there really is no limit, and you can see this in like any multivariable calculus course. Quite simply, if you take like the integral of a line, you'll get an area. If you take the integral of that area, you'll get a volume. You take the integral of that and you get some four-dimensional, you can get a quantitative value, but it's like at that point, it's when we stop being able to understand or visualize precisely what it means. And I mean, that's where the math works. The math can account for 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, however dimensions you want. That's where we get things like string theory, which are like kind of like completely incomprehensible to me. But and that's where, at least in the avant-garde, we saw this rise of like non-Euclidean geometry to attempt to kind of apply this math that works to different theorizations of like axes of cognition. And in that sense, when we think about whether or not this is applicable to art or just solely confined to art, or if it's applicable to life, I think it's easier to understand in the context of Chlebnikov in the other half of my project, where he's attempting to create via Zaum this kind of universal language that will very much so be a like practical pursuit. And I think Malevich is attempting to do something similar in his convening an artistic council to liquidate all former arts of the world and to effectively, proclaiming an economic revolution of the world. It is a very ambitious pursuit, I think, something that he is trying to kind of revolutionize cognition as much as he can, as much as and I think it was probably more easier to think of that as a kind of practical pursuit based in life and applicable to life back then in their context, when they were surrounded by avant-garde experimentations in this realm that were of a similar ambition, at least.
Okay, thank you for your question. In terms of the Desятая страна issue, this is very interesting news to me, but I was able to find in my introduction to this text by Eugene Ostashevsky, at least he writes, quote, "The 10th land and comma, the country of the future, comma, is 10 stran instead of the feminine 10 strana. I don't know how this.
That's correct. It's
Yeah.
Desiate stran
Yeah, 10
instead
stran.
of desiate strana.
Oh yeah.
It's an adjective and a noun. It's desiate stran.
I think I'm saying it
It's a
incorrectly.
masculinized version of desiate strana.
Issues
Yeah.
with translation. But so I guess that I guess that's that. But the ozera example, and in terms of how that relates to the whole work as being misogynistic, it puts into question the like what is misogyny as it relates to, you know, this text and the greater, larger context that we are living in. And I believe I showed the slide up there that read the short, brief context that it was in, that the lake has become harder than water. And because of the very nature of this opera, the plot is kind of hard to track. But I think that the underlying argument that I was reiterating when people do call this text misogynistic is that it's not a sort of active misogyny where, you know, tracing the like etymological root of misogyny as an active sort of the text saying that it hates women. I would argue that it's a sort of more placid form of misogyny, and that is shown through the erasure of women in the text and all that is feminine from the text. So that was the argument that I was re-articulating. But it does bring into question, so like, to what extent could we say this text is misogynistic for these reasons, and what kind of difference does an active misogyny versus a sort of more passive one, like I described, have on the text itself, which are interesting questions that I would be interested in exploring. So.
Should I pose my questions? Are there other people who've been waiting? Yeah, sure.
Hello, my question is to Tova. Going back to the fifth dimension, did he mean when he says the economy is the fifth dimension that manipulate art or whatever? Did he mean the real economy, like the let's grow our food, let's build our houses, let's just improve our life, or were he talking about the Stalinist 5 years ago, 5 years plan, you know, money coming from overseas, industrial, you know what I mean? Where was he talking about the distance, the economy of the financier, or the economy of improving the life of the Russian peasant? And also, how do you explain his disconnect from the reality of his time? While he was writing whatever he was writing, we have the Russian Revolution, we have the World War II, World War I was going on regardless of the meaningless of World War I. That doesn't justify the avant-garde literally ignoring it.
So yeah, I mean, talk about translation studies. I think the term economy is applied in a completely different context here, and it has it maintains very few of the associations that we have with it. So he wasn't referring to financial economy or economy as a concept in terms of like macro political structures. It was very much so in terms of like, I think deriving from this kind of idea of an economic abstraction, something that's something that is in terms of like economic restraint, is what he was trying to tie into, something that is a more he talks about the utilitarian necessity of economic restraint and how you can utilize this kind of simplicity and this abstraction to access something more. And I think throughout his writings, this term economy, which is very elusive, he defines it like in 5 different ways. He's like, it's probably the source of all action, but he includes the word probably. It's but it's definitely a novel concept, and I think he tried to create something that, as much as you can epitomize what he was trying to do in a concrete word. I think economy does that. But he was very much so not just referring to like financial economy or to abstraction as just pure abstraction. There was something more there. And as for his milieu, or his contemporary historical context, he definitely responded to the Russian Revolution, and he was, you know, amidst the avant-garde, these people who were actively involved, and in that sense, his art also changed in response to the historical developments of this time. His geometric abstraction really emerged with the Futurist movement that came from Italy, or arguably was inspired or influenced from Italy, 1909, and then developed past the Russian Revolution, further abstraction, and eventually changed into completely different under like the Stalinist regime. So there is definitely an evolution in response to his historical time.
So we're actually
Russian revolution or with foreign revolution coming and catching?
I don't know that I'm qualified to answer that question in all honesty. I think the Russian Revolution was a very Russian revolution, and I will leave it at that.
it's good to end on big questions. And we unfortunately have to end, but I'm sure that if other people have questions, I know I'm like burning up with my own, you'll be able to ask them directly to the panelists following the conclusion. Let's give them all a last round of applause.
Okay, so one last thing. My name is Jo Park, and I have the job of closing remarks. So this day caps a year of revolutionary inquiry. It has been, sorry guys, do you guys want to, you're like now stuck up there. Okay, all right, it'll be fast. So it has been an honor for me to serve as the faculty director of the Undergraduate Humanities Forum. And now that we are wrapping up, I can definitively say that this is the best gig on campus. So the people at the helm make the Wolf Humanities Center a vital place for the difficult work that we do in the humanities. So Jamal Elias is our fearless leader. He set the tone for open and adventurous inquiry in our group, and we are privileged to be a part of Huda Fakhreddin's revolution. We began the year with Huda's visit to our seminar, and her thoughtfulness and poise has been our standard. Sarah Varney made everything happen. We asked for a lot this year, including train and museum tickets in New York, snacks for a workday on a farm, and a chartered bus to Jersey. And she never blinked an eye. Stephen and then Aaron managed so many details for us, and thank goodness for Pamela, who took care of us every week. So we tried out something new this year for our seminar. We asked the Wolf Postdoctoral Fellows to serve as our respondents, and they addressed our papers with remarkable seriousness and generosity. Tim was our first respondent. He set the bar very high. And then Melissa, Alessandra, Jose, Alex, and Josue were just as attentive and encouraging. And an extra special thank you to Josue. I mean, what a wonderful cheerleader for us. So I thank the extraordinary cohort of fellows who prove themselves to be as talented in the classroom as they are in their scholarship. The faculty colleagues who served as respondents today, Dag, Rema, and Kevin, demonstrate that world-class scholars are mentors. I thank them for adding their brilliance to our panels, and I thank all of the faculty advisors who have nurtured these minds. What we do to usher the new scholars into advanced research is the best guarantee of the future of the humanities. So our undergraduate fellows did the real work of humanistic inquiry. They theorized revolution in fresh readings of Fanon and archives on China's agrarian revolution, and that's all stuff that they found. on their own. They explored revolutions in approach and access, in a Black radical turn to Asian practice, abortion care in Latin America, and a planetary frame for healthcare. They explored revolutions in faith and labor, in a new Catholic saint of death in Mexico, and Korean women's bodies on the line. And they explored literary revolutions of wandering in Korea and sensation in Russia. And by this point, I think I am an honorary Russianist. Suprematism turns out to be where it's at. And I learned about feminist translations and fifth dimensions. There were so many dimensions to all of this scholarship and the live connections between them. The hardest part of our seminar was like grouping the panels because there's so many awesome connections, right? And now is the time to thank our supreme co-leaders, Charlie and Hertha. But when I met the two of you guys last summer, I knew the UHF would work out this year, but you both made it a delight. So your leadership has been wise and enlightening and kind of sparkly. And it was Charlie's wry understanding, which was on full display in his amazing opening remarks, and Hertha's reassuring understanding that made this year's Undergraduate Humanities Forum shine. We all looked forward to Fridays on the 6th floor of Williams this year. So today's conference was a showcase of what a university is for. This is what can be done when a thinker is given the time, space, and support to follow a line of thought. And the results have been revolutionary. Thank you.